Afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Atkinson. I'm the manager of public programs here at the MCA Chicago. Welcome. Before we get started, if you could all please take out your cell phones to just double check that they are on silent, that'd be much appreciated. Unless, of course, you're using it for captioning. I want to acknowledge the land on which we reside. The Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago is located on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, Ottawa, and Ojibwe. Other nations, including the Miami, Ho-Chunk, Sac and Fox, have also called this area home. Today, Chicago is home to the third largest urban American Indian community in the United States. This land is native land. I want to thank you all for coming and welcome you to the program today. Thank you also to our generous funders, a full list of which you can see here. Today, I'm pleased to introduce this conversation between Andrea Carlson and Iris Colburn on the event of the opening of the exhibition, Chicago Works, Andrea Carlson, Shimmer on Horizons, which is just like the best title. It's really good. I'm going to just do a little bit of bio here, and then I'm going to let them take it away. So, Iris Colburn is currently a curatorial associate at the MCA Chicago, who holds an MA in art history from the University of Chicago. Among her curatorial projects while at the MCA, please don't miss the neighboring exhibition, which you can just see right next door there, Virginia Jaramillo, Principle of Equivalence, which traverses the artist's practice across abstract painting and handmade paperworks. As Iris reminded me a couple of days ago, both Jaramillo and Carlson have an investment in the line as a thread that weaves across space and time. I've been fortunate to be a colleague of Colburn's for the last couple of years. I won't say too much, Iris, and have consistently seen the root of curatorial practice, which is to say care, across her work with artists, artworks, art history, colleagues, and relationships with communities. It is a care that I know we will see today in this conversation as well. Joining her on stage is the multi-hyphenate maker, Andrea Carlson. Among Carlson's many public art projects and exhibitions include a billboard project with the Whitney Museum of American Art, which we'll see a little bit later, participation in the Toronto Biennial, and an upcoming presentation with Prospect 6, also known as Prospect New Orleans. Carlson is an equally incisive writer, including in books such as Indigenous Futurisms, and an organization builder as one of the co-founders of the Center for Native Futures, an art space dedicated to the work of Native artists in Chicago and beyond. The organization's name here is key to her practice, one that, much like the works on paper you can see in the show upstairs, fold together the past, present, and future to be both critical of our moment and make new space within it. And with that, you can please join me in welcoming Iris and Andrea.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a really beautiful, generous introduction. And thank you all for being here. It's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I have to say I love all the Minneapolis representation in the room, although I do love Chicago. Because it was actually in Minneapolis that I first got to know Andrea's work. I didn't meet her then, but while I was interning at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts one summer during college, I just heard your name everywhere, and I think the fact that I never met you and I didn't even see your work in person just speaks to your presence in that city, and it's been such a pleasure to get to know you and to get to know you in Chicago and to see your imprint in Chicago. As I was saying last night, it feels really surreal to be here since we've been in conversation since 2017, and I still remember seeing your painting Ink Babble, which is here on the screen, back in 2015, when it was on view at the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe. This painting has always stayed with me, how you rigorously repeat images across these 60 paper panels, evoking both the story of the Tower of Babel while toying with the format of landscape painting to consider histories of both colonial expansion and indigenous resistance. We're very lucky to have this work in our collection, thanks to the Emerge group, and I think there's some couple of members in here, and I just want to say thank you so much for supporting Andrea's practice. This is a show that's very special to me, but also to the institution. And in thinking about putting this show together, Andrea and I wanted to focus on her approach to landscape. And let's see. This was partly inspired not only by Ink Babble, but also how lately Andrea's been showing a lot of public artworks. And I thought that this exhibition would be a really beautiful opportunity to present work within a gallery context, but still focus on landscape. And you may be wondering, why are we in the Commons today, not the theater? Part of that is we really love the vibe of the Commons. These beautiful plants, it's a kind of public space. But I think it also really frames the conversation around landscape very nicely. Some of you can see Lake Michigan. The blinds are obscuring it. But also, as Andrea's work here on Potawatomi land reminds us, this building is on land created out of landfill, land that was never ceded by any Native nation to the U.S. government. So the MCA is a very interesting place to both host your work and I think this conversation today. So thank you, Andrea, for being here. And to start us off, I thought we could think a little more broadly, why landscape? What compels you to make work about landscape?
It's clearly a fraught genre when you think of American landscape painting and how it has been used historically as propaganda. You see various landscapes, very, serene, beautiful, lighting, very romantic. Typically, there's not a lot of people in those paintings. If they are, there might be, a historic, native just for scale or context. And that genre of painting is it's not native, like it's not something we got to contribute to. And if anything, it's very anti-Indigenous. Here is land that is free for the taking. It is not being used. Like all of those paintings historically were used to neutralize that idea of settlement, to make people feel okay or just in taking unused land and then making farms and tilling the soil and actually harming the environment. So when Native artists approach landscape, it is a totally different paradigm. It is totally thrown on its head, but there's a lot of play in that space to not have it be a particular thing, to have it be many things, to have it just kind of like honor the land in a different way. I typically paint on paper. If you think of how paper has been violently and historically used to displace natives through treaties, through deeds, through contracts, to abstract the land, to make it commodify it, paper has been used violently to disenfranchise Indigenous voices and people. So by kind of reclaiming that material, putting landscape on that material, there is this kind of like painting in of the void. These are also spaces that, with all landscape painting, they're not actual spaces. They're alluded to spaces that you're holding in your mind. It's not real land. There's a falseness to that space. And so I think about that, about how this invented space, we can place ideas in there, we can hold it in our imaginations, and how that is very parallel to decolonization. Like we can hold the idea of what decolonization could look like in our head, but can we really get there from here? Or is there a lot of ideas of decolonization? Is it even possible? Is a world without sexism and racism and a world that's decolonized possible? I don't know, but I know that we can hold it in our head. And I also think about that as like the horizon's always kicked out into the future. Like you can't actually get there. Like you can see it, but every time you get there, it's even further into the future. So I'm thinking about land more conceptually, like through the work. But and then there's this hidden coup where I could participate, sell landscapes, buy land to be returned to the tribe. And that's like a new possibility for me, is how can this paper abstraction actually do right by actual land. So there's a few, like, land is just, it's fraught, it's there's not a neutral, there's no neutral ground. It's all politicized. So how can we use that, or how can we like participate in a way that is that is more healing, I guess.
Yeah, you've just said a lot right there. But it reminds me of something you said earlier this week that has really stayed with me, which is that, and here I'm paraphrasing you, of course, landscapes get papered away, but through paper we can reimagine or imagine it back. And I think that phrase really speaks to your practice. And I thought we could, kind of break down the paintings a little bit because they're so referential. And as Daniel mentioned, there's a really nice tie with the Jaramillo show and your engagement with line, especially the horizon, which of course, you already brought up, thinking about the landscape genre and how artists typically use or have used the horizon to describe land as vast, as vacant, as available for the taking. But of course, that's not what's going on in these works. The horizon is not empty at all. And I love what you've been saying about the horizon as a space of refusal. And I think the title really speaks well to that idea, the title of the show. So could you tell us, where does the title come from? And what role do horizons play in your work?
So Shimmer on Horizon is actually a song by Throwing Muses. I think it came out in the 90s. And the song, I've been thinking a lot about the horizon. George Morrison, who's also an Anishinaabe artist from Grand Portage, I kind of grew up with his art and considering the horizon. If you live on a lake, if you live on Lake Superior, you have that horizon line, the lake line embedded in how you organize information. Everything's up on the shore. You have, the mood of the lake. In Chicago, here you always know where east is. Every Chicago person can locate east, it seems like, if you're downtown. But it has, like, the lakes have a life and a mood, and you start to organize yourself based on your relationship to that horizon line. But the Throwing Muses song, the singer is talking about this space. She shimmers on horizon. She is out of touch or out of reach. And that's a place of safety and power and control. Like, she can't necessarily be accessed. She's like, I can drink you under the table, but you still can't reach me. And it's just like, even in vulnerability, she's like, this is a space that I have agency and control over, and you can't harm me here. So I was thinking too about the horizon as being that ideal space. We think in terms of landscapes, plural. There's many paintings that make up this genre, it's plural. If you topologically think of where we live on a sphere, we live on a globe, unless you're a flat earther, but I don't know what to do for you if you are. But we live on a sphere. And so topologically speaking, we live on a singular surface. We live on one, like a unified. But it's also like an idea of infinity. You can like go around it as a speck. And so it's also like related to time. So I use this kind of cellular organization of these spaces to think of time and space. I think Ink Babble actually is really easy, and Ink Babble actually belongs to the MCA. If you think of a panorama shot in still photography, it's a really long, panoramas are really long, maybe landscape shots. If you think of a panorama in terms of like celluloid film that you'd take out of a movie camera and you'd have these cells that are stacked up, and the panorama would have like maybe an object that would like candy cane down, like at an angle. That would be the time difference between each cell. So this is a double panorama. Every column is time-based. Every row is space-based. So it's like time-space splitting out in two directions. And I wanted it to break up that idea of stasis. Like a lot of our Ojibwe stories are performed, there's time put into them, but I'm making 2D objects and referencing Anishinaabe content. So I was thinking of how can I make a 2D image, but give it that shimmer, give it that life, give it that energy, give it movement, give it time. And so by making very large pieces that the viewer has to navigate, they can't, you can't necessarily drink it in all at once. You have to navigate that space. And there's a layer of denial worked into that as well, or like the refusal of access to that space, because you kind of are getting chopped up. And then the author and poet Hyde Erdrich talks about in this work that it looks like the wake off a back of a boat, where your eye is trying to get all of the flicks of information. So I think that it visually looks woven. It visually has a lot of I think people can get it, maybe even physically felt than all of the words I'm heaping on it right now. But I'm happy that it works that way, that it has that it within its own self is a space.
Yeah, your paintings really pulsate. They feel like they're moving. And I hope everyone can see them after our talk. Again, there's a lot to unpack here, but something that I keep thinking about is I got to visit you recently in northern Minnesota, where you recently moved to and you primarily live there, and experienced Lake Superior for the first time, which is much wider than Lake Michigan somehow. That's how I felt. But I was really struck by your proximity to Canada. When we were there, we ate at this diner called South of the Border, and we went to Grand Portage National Park, visited this beautiful waterfall where our cells connected to Canadian phone lines. And I've been thinking a lot about the border, and in particular that border, and how it maybe has influenced your work, especially the way that you just spoke about, there are not multiple landscapes, there's not multiple horizons, but the land gets broken into multiples by political constructions like the border. And when I look at your paintings lately, after many years, I can imagine kind of taking some of them off of the wall and using them to make one sphere. And so in that way, a painting is creating not a sphere rather than these layers, or at the same time as it's creating these layers of landscape. So I wonder if you can speak to, how the border, and in particular with Canada, has influenced your work.
So I think like maybe the scholarly term, these like liminal spaces, these penumbras, these like edges between like shadows and light, but also like shorelines between water and land. There are things that are linear and have border regions and lands, but like the U.S.-Canadian border is an imaginary line that is painted across a continent and upheld by two colonial powers, and with Mexico and the U.S. as well. These are those giant earth drawings that are a form of violence on the earth, and living in like the margins of that space, living in any kind of liminal space. There's both like a cut, but there's also like maybe a freedom in that space. I know that like with sweat lodges that I've been to, it's you hold them at dusk. You go in where it's daylight and you come out when it's night. There's these spaces, these transitional spaces that hold a lot of power, and I don't think that colonial governments. I don't think that they miss that. I think they realize that these spaces hold a lot of power. When you go there, it's fully armed spaces. with Grand Portage in northern Minnesota, it butts right up to the U.S.-Canadian border, and then right on the other side of the border is Fort William land. So it's two Native nations that have this fake border kind of drawn through one community. And we're used to thinking about the border crossed us with the Mexico-U.S. Border, but these borders also cross through singular families and singular communities of Native folks on both the U.S. and Mexican and the U.S.-Canadian border. But it's, these spaces are powerful, and it's not necessarily power good. It can be power bad when it comes to colonial powers. So one of the good things about the U.S.-Canadian border that was happening during the Calvary, when the U.S. Calvary was killing so many Native folks and committing genocide, was Native people often referred to that border as the medicine line, because if you had the Calvary on your tail and they're chasing you and you went over that imaginary line, they couldn't cross it. And so the Natives constantly were using that for protection. It's like, oh, they're on it, like, oh, the Canadians, and just keep crossing that border. And so it was a medicine line because there was some safety just because of the treaties they were actually honoring between the countries. Now we have the Jay Treaty, which Indigenous people are supposed to be able to freely cross the Canadian-U.S. border, without any problem. Of course, there's like any border crossing, it's contingent, or it's they found ways of pulling that back. But yeah, it's definitely, and what you're saying about like maybe wrapping a space almost circular in the work. Many of my smaller works have a consistent horizon line. So if you put the works together, the line goes from piece to piece to piece. So even though they feel like a window, the horizon line would connect. And that's actually something, like a device that I took from George Morrison. He had a number of series that the horizon line would connect. And, just like the lake, he's imprinted on how I organize information. And if you look up his work, our work looks nothing alike, but there's still some, there's a relationship there. There's relationality between us. Okay, I don't know. Did I cover that?
It's a big question.
I'm like, that's literally, like, I would love to talk about that all day.
I thought I would pull up this painting, Ancestor and Descendant, because you can see George Morrison on one of the cowrie shells on our left. But thinking about accessibility and, your desire to not really fully let in someone into the painting, and coming back to the beginning of our conversation when you were thinking about the landscape tradition, I wanted to shift to another kind of line that I see in your work, which is these diagonal lines that cut through the painting, and which you use to organize these different motifs. But when we started working on the show, it was the first time I looked at these lines, and I thought, oh, these remind me of the lines that artists use to create a sense of linear perspective. And of course, in the landscape genre, artists would use these lines to paint very realistic images of the landscape. And often where these lines would meet would be, of course, the vanishing point and the place where they really wanted your eye to come to in the painting. But here, what's really interesting is that the lines don't meet in the painting, but right at the edge, in the center. And so there's a way I think that these lines also play with our eyes. They don't really fully let us into the painting, but they, pull them up, and then there's other motifs that pull them down, and there's a real sense of, again, movement. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to these diagonal lines, because when I told you this in install, you're like, but this also reminds me more of sun rays. And
I think, well, light is a really important feature of the work. There are references to, there's different Fresnel lenses that are used in lighthouses that can project light further, and then you can find the land from a watery seascape. That's at the center of this. There's this kind of like radiation of light. It also cuts across 4 stacked landscapes. So you can see the seascapes, like 4 of them stacked up. And that is to not make a singularity around landscape, but to break it up. But then the light passes through each of them. And so like through the light, they're kind of collapsed into each other in a sense. The false sense of space or atmosphere or the depth that the light has is it's also kind of helps break up the space. It definitely makes it feel like you can't enter, or there's something kind of like askew. For a while I was putting both the night and the day in paintings at the same time, and I would use these lines to put night and day in the sky at the same time. And that's again to play with that sense of time, that these rays of light can also kind of like almost like the hands of a clock, that it's going to radiate in different ways at different times. But there's definitely a sense of unifying the 4 different through light, through the time of the day. I also kind of want that linear line. I want to break it up as much as possible through objects or things that kind of come into the shore, into view, and obscure it. And then you have these other areas of the painting where you have depth and space and a place to rest your eye. So you'll have a lot of information, and then you need a place in the work that is calm, if that makes sense. You needed it to. And so the lines actually help with that aspect too, with that kind of making these areas that still feel in communication with each other. And it does lead your eye up to the top, and then you're like, where's the important thing that is like on the top of the Christmas tree? Like, what is hanging up there? In this case, there's an infinity sign. If you know about the Métis people in Canada, they're like French and Ojibwe, like kind of merged culture. Their flag is this infinity sign. They're like, we will be forever. It's part of their like maybe national identity and flag. And I was thinking about the infinity sign and also like our access to future and futurity, and how that's, for Indigenous folks, so I've started using the infinity sign everywhere in the work, but also the paper that I use has an infinity water or embossment in it, and that's to signify that the paper is archival, has a base put in it so that acids don't. Anyway, it's a technical thing, but it's to make you aware of the archival nature of the paper. And so when you look at the work, if you get really close, you might even see this little infinity sign in the corners that I didn't steam out or anything. But it's something that I just kind of pulled into to kind of play with that. This is a symbol that a lot of people know what it means, and that it to make us forever space. It's something that I want to, as far as light goes, I want to play. I have very well lit spaces, but I want to play with shadows in the future. Some of my source imagery has different light sources in the objects, and so it's like, where is the light coming from? And like the shadows will all be in wrong places, that are inconsistent between objects. So that's something in the future that I think I'm going to play with shadow a little bit more.
And this painting is called Cast a Shadow. So you're already doing it.
I'm giving hints that might happen.
Yeah.
Work is telling me what to do. Like, you should probably cast a shadow.
Yeah, when we were installing, light just kept coming up, and that was probably the surprise of install for me. There's a video work in the show that lights itself. This work is called Cast a Shadow. We just spoke about these kind of sun rays that permeate throughout the work. And my colleague Cecilia was saying that the horizon is a light line. So I thought that was really beautiful and something that's I don't have resolved, but that was a really beautiful surprise during installs to see light coming up again and again. And it made me think about vision and, of course, this idea of perspective, which, again, coming back to the landscape genre, artists were thinking about, have been thinking about, providing this kind of totalizing perspective. And I think perspective is maybe one of the most important words for you and for thinking about your work. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that, how you build a sense of perspective through this.
I mean, there's a number of ways to, it is actually, when you look at like a seascape, to figure out scale. There are some works that have like hands, and it's like the POV of the viewer then is maybe implicated by the hands, or you could imagine it as like their hands. So you'll see some works that have that. And then there's some things like with scale that really mess with perspective, like the really large birds, really large hands. And then they'll be in relationship with something that you wouldn't expect to be that scale. And it's not necessarily to diminish or make things. It's not necessarily using the like larger things are more important and smaller things aren't. But there is a conversation between some of the objects. In these two particular pieces, it's hard to tell, but there are white-throated sparrows in each of them. That's my new bird obsession. They have 3 chromosomal genders, and they're the only, we don't have a lot of like distinct chromosomal, like as specific in other species. This is the one they found, and they're like, what is this? In a kit. So they think it's just a really interesting survival strategy for the birds. Their call, if you're in northern Minnesota or parts of like northern New York or Canada, it's like, now I'm going to make a bird call. Which, but it's like tweet, 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 tweet to tweet, tweet to tweet, tweet. You probably heard it in the woods. Like it just seems like so that call is migrating east to west. And the finals, the tweet to tweet, tweet to tweet, tweet to tweet, tweet, those are reducing to 2. In the Ojibwe teaching around that bird call is that each of the 4 finals in that song is one of the earths that have been destroyed before. We're living in the 4th earth. These are 4 stacked landscapes. So kind of wanted to like call out to the white-throated sparrow, who are my favorite now, that in that teaching, they're talking about the different layers of the worlds that have gone on before, and now that song is migrating and changing, what does that mean? Is it okay? Like, is the bird telling us something? Maybe we're getting a truncated existence here, but yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about memory work, especially since the pandemic. When the Columbus statues were coming down and people were talking about whose stories are told in public and what is shared and what is erased. I was thinking about the space I occupy as an artist, the walls I have access to an agency over, and thinking about the memory work I could put in my own. Like, I have power to have memory work in my own art. There's a space there. So Ancestor and Descendant has my grandmother's names. It has Jim Denemy and George Morrison's name, kind of like people that I follow and have passed on, and they're like held in my work. Then at the center of Ancestor and Descendant, it's Inda Chikuchibigan, the one who is tied to me through the generations. That word in Ojibwe means both ancestor and descendant. You could use it in either direction because it literally translates to the one who's tied to me through the generations, and it could go in either direction. And that's how we consider relationality, like relationships, is that it's not necessarily like the ancestors with the wisdom is linear and top down. It's more circular. It's more, and right now there's a lot of conversations around descendancy and like less than, but that's not how Ojibwe people saw relationships. They didn't see one as more and one as less than. They saw your descendants as being just as important and valuable as your ancestors. The descendants you don't know who aren't born yet as being just as important as maybe the ancestors that you don't remember, but that they all come from the same space and that it's circular. So I love this word. It's also the same in Potawatomi as it is in Ojibwe, so it's one of those shared teachings. So I've been trying to do more memory work in my art, and some of it is much more personal. That's a new thing for me as well. I have a lot of institutional critique and older work, but I'm starting to be more reflective and put personal things in. There's this pattern that comes up again and again, and that's from L'Assomption sashes that are like finger woven sashes that were used to carry things. So there's objects like black ash baskets, Kelly Church made, and she gave me permission to recreate in my work. Those are for carrying things. Those are, what are we carrying with us? And then like almost honoring those vessels that carry things. John Lau, who's a Potawatomi historian, was saying that those black ash baskets that we still make today of a tree that is being destroyed by the emerald ash borer, like hopefully we will keep the practice of making the baskets going. But those baskets, black ash baskets, a long time ago were used to transfer the dirt that made all the mounds, all the beautiful mound forms throughout Wisconsin and what is now Wisconsin and what is now Illinois and Iowa. And so when you think of that continuity of the very thing that we used to make the mounds, we're still making those baskets, and now they're being threatened by the emerald ash borer. There's continuity in our histories. There's still an aspect of mound making that we still carry and we still remember, and it's still like in our muscle memory, or at least in Kelly's. I don't know how to make them. So yeah, there's I don't know. I kind of went. You
answered my 3-4 questions.
Okay, sorry.
No. My future questions. I mean, I'm really glad you brought up memory and muscle memory, because that's something we've been talking about. How you repeat different images across paintings and across years, even, and that's been something I've been thinking about. Is the memory that we carry within our own bodies. And just earlier today, we were talking about hands and how often hands appear in your paintings, but also video, and how that might be a suggestion, again, of those stories that we hold within us. But I'm also really glad you brought up memory work, because, of course, it's so important to you. But also, I think that I've been really reflecting on how, again, coming back to the landscape genre, how often Native artists working and thinking about the landscape get pinned against that genre. And how, again, your paintings are so referential, and it seems like the structure of them, thinking about that they're on paper, that there's a grid, thinking about the horizon line as, again, and as another reading that you've written about is this kind of storied crest, so a space of potential sagas and future desires that really speaks to this colonial desire to discover the unknown. But then the paintings, they're not, the subject matter really it's not really about that. It's more thinking again about memory, about futurity. But I love that you brought up mounds, because I know that at the Center for Native Futures, you organized the Mound Summit. And
they organized it.
The
row in the bag.
The row in the bag. There is a Mound Summit. But I remember you were telling me about it, and you were like, but it's not about mounds. So I thought we could talk about another work in the show, not one of the paintings, but a new sculpture, which you're going to have to go up and see because we don't have a good photo of it yet. But it's similar to this one on the screen, which is titled Never Ending Monument from 2022. I just wonder if you could share about mounds, how they inspire you, and how they inspired this new sculpture.
So we're in mound country, if you didn't know, but then all of Turtle Island is mound country. They even had them in Alaska and northern Canada. So the indigenous folk like a good mound. But there's a lot of archaeological evidence that suggests that the mounds were not just effigy mounds as we see them now, but a number of them had different columns or wooden pillars worked into the design of the mounds that potentially had various clan animals or things that they conveyed to across the landscape that you could see off of them. There is some speculation that the flagpoles that we have now with the eagle at the top that was probably taken from indigenous folks, like it was inspired by indigenous insignia and clans and things that were placed on poles. So I was thinking of, with Never-Ending Monument, we have these areas where we can maybe speculate as to what kind of pole came off of the mounds. But there's this elder, Tobasonaquet Ibun, that was very influential in my life, and I was talking about language loss or losing our stories and bits of our culture to him when I was in undergrad, and he said, Andrea, these teachings came to us in visions and dreams. These things came to us from observations of our environments, which are always changing. These teachings that we have came from, a very intimate sense of our environments. He's like, we may be losing things, but we can always pull them back. We can always, the visions can still come to us. There's a feeling of loss and anxiety around loss, fear around loss, but he's like that, and it was really empowering to hear him say we have the power to pull them back. And so I was thinking about these kind of lost columns and that were on the poles, and what if I just made them? What if I that was part of the memory work, is to make them? And yeah, they're in an interior museum space, but I've always thought of the museum space as a landscape, within its own right. So it's always no, this is a space where this thing can be imagined as well. And what better space to imagine anything in a white box space, where you can maybe project your own sense of place. So Never-Ending Monument is in this piece against Cast a Shadow, the painting behind. And I was thinking of when a monument is put up, when Columbus is put up, the shadow that it casts, the grass that is mowed around it, the things that are deprived of light because of this thing, because of this harmful image out in public. So the text in Cast a Shadow is Never-Ending Monument, if you must cast a shadow, cast your shadow here, on the artwork itself. And so I was thinking about these pieces in conversation, that the shadow would be cast off of these, not necessarily that space. But there's a lot of interior, inside the painting. There's a George Morrison monument that was never built. He really wanted to. It was his plans for building this monument where he is currently buried that hasn't ever been built. And so there's future planning that he had made that never came to fruition, that within the work itself. And that's a form of some of the memory work as well. But yeah, so the piece that's upstairs is obstacles for a surveyor. And I was also thinking of the idea of indigenous monuments as being the thing that you can't survey the land because they're in the way. Our visions for what would be memorialized in a public space. So that's also how it could function. And then there's I don't know if you have a question for it, but there's also the piece Perpetual Genre that is also kind of messing with the idea of surveying land.
Do you want to talk about that piece?
Find it.
You had it.
So this is almost like a recap of older work. I did this series called the Vor series that was all kind of cannibal genre films from Italy, and it was almost the work was Native people can see what you're doing, right? When like the racist imagery is made and like put out there in the world, there's this genre of horror film subgenre that has cannibals, and it's all indigenous folks, and then the revenge films, so then the indigenous people can get their revenge. They're very violent films, but I made a series where it was the titles were all taken from these horror films, and I was kind of commenting on this idea of the cannibal, or in Ojibwe culture, the Wendigo, as this being that, or entity or institution that misidentifies who he consumes or it consumes. And how in Anishinaabe scholarship, how it has, various scholars have addressed the idea of the Wendigo as a metaphor, or maybe even an allegory, is how colonization misidentifies or consumes the other, consumes indigenous folks, assimilates them into its own body, into its own project. So seeing colonization as that cannibal, to see that as that project of consumption, consume. And so I was thinking of it in terms of assimilation, which, a lot of, Jack Frost and Gerald Visner and a lot of, indigenous scholars have used the idea of the Wendigo to describe colonization. So it wasn't I didn't make it up, but I was, commenting through these films. So I had done that work. And then, maybe around 2014, I kind of moved on to the larger works. And I recently revisited the cannibal theme again, because I'm thinking about, I've just been reminded, more recently, about this idea of linking indigeneity to savagery in order to justify taking the land. So, every time Indigenous Peoples Day kind of rolled around in Chicago, my You're on Potawatomi land banners on Chicago River, the images of it would come online, and people would be happy Indigenous Peoples Day, and they'd have the banners and talk about Potawatomi trail of death or displacement or things like that. And this one year, that image came up, and someone had commented on the image that the Potawatomi lost their land claim to Chicago when they ate out the heart of William Wells. So Chris Papan screenshot it, sent it to me, and let's go get this guy. I'll eat out his heart. But it was so direct. Even this old thing of accusing Indigenous people of savagery in order to take the land and linking those things together is still with us today. That was used as you lose the land when you ate out this guy's heart. I'm first of all, probably nobody ate out William Wells's heart. That was some uncle was bragging. we have the Potawatomi folks have the Wendigo as a story too, and that nobody does that. That means you're sick in the head. So anyway, but I thought it was really interesting that was being mobilized that way again. That conversation of savagery justifies violence and genocide. So instead of just replaying that horror genre's titles, I was what if I did my own titles? What if I took that power away from, instead of hey, we see what you've done and what you're doing, to owning the language of the work. So perpetual genre is why can't we get rid of this narrative? This genre of native savagery, why is it still used to justify land grabs? So I have in perpetual genre, I have the cannibal sculptures from the 17th century superimposed over these surveyor prisms that are used to make lines to survey property. And I have them in relation to each other. This thing that's used to take land away or to cut it up is directly linked to this idea of this propaganda idea of savagery or cannibalism. And so I think that it's a good piece for Chicago.
And that's William Wells of Wells Street.
Yeah.
Right.
So every time you go down Wells Street,
Which is not that
remember
far.
your Potawatomi land. If you don't remember it, we might eat out your heart.
I thought it was an interesting piece to end the show with, because you might look at it and think, this doesn't really seem to be about landscape in the way that the other works in the show are. But you alluded to this earlier. You said you think of museums as a landscape in their own right. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
So I think that we're often used to thinking of interior spaces as like landscape is outside. You know, the paintings of the landscape is a window to the outside. Inside spaces aren't land. And no, we know that this is stacked landscapes on a piece of land. In particular, MCA is built on unceded land. And if you don't know what unceded means, it's just that Native folks did not cede this land over to the United States. So this is an illegal occupation. The only thing that grants the U.S. A just, lawful occupation of Native land is through treaties. There's no treaty from Michigan Avenue to the lake. All this landfill that was put in to make new land, there's no treaty that covers it. So when the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi came and sued the city, saying you don't get to build new land, that has to be covered by treaty. And it was brought up to the Supreme Court. Clearly, the Supreme Court was like, "Oh, we can side with us or them," and they sided with them. And in their decision, which is only like a paragraph long, it says that the Potawatomi abandoned this land. So if you know anything about Potawatomi history and the removal of Potawatomi folks, it was through the Trail of Death. I don't think that that's a really crass way of describing the Trail of Death, is calling it abandonment when you have it a forced removal. And the Potawatomi Band is now, like, when it comes to Potawatomi diaspora, it is the most complete project of diaspora. It's like throughout Canada all the way up to California. Like it was like really pushing Potawatomi folks to every corner of the continent. But that also shows just how paranoid the colonizers were of Potawatomi unity, that they had to be broken up so far. So in how I imagine, this space is also like when you look at where Michigan Avenue is and where the lake is and all that space that's unceded, that should belong to the Potawatomi people because they came back and sued for it. They were violently removed from it. Where does Chicago tell its stories? MCA, the Art Institute, Navy Pier with museums. All that strip is full of Chicago's myth-making about itself. That's where Chicago's telling its story. That's like, the radio station. That's where everything is. That's where Chicago is telling its story on this piece of land that it invented for itself. And then those storytelling places, don't tell that. They don't tell the story of the Potawatomi. So I feel like it's like there's these symbolic layerings, and then of course there's like museums in the parks with the Chicago Parks Board, and like these museums gave the land, the grounds that the museums are on, to the Chicago Parks Board, and not to the Potawatomi folks for like $1. Like, I'm pretty sure the Potawatomi would pay $1 for. I think that should be renegotiated. But yeah, there's a lot of myth making in the strip of land, and there's a lot of justice that needs to be had on this land. And I'm Ojibwe and Scandinavian, but I like the Potawatomi are kin. We're cousins. We can hang. so when I moved to Chicago, it was something that I noticed right away, was that erasure, and there's a lot of work to be done here, I think. So the grounds of MCA, if you want to.
I think that's a great way to close.
I have ideas.
Look to the future. Yes. Do you want to share those ideas?
Well, the ideas are land back. It's a good thing. Don't be scared of there's always this fear too, like if we give the land back to natives, they'll just put a casino on it. And I'm like, y'all just put a casino on it. You didn't need natives to do that. Anyway, whatever. Okay. Ended in a tirade. But me quite. Thanks for coming to stolen land.
Come back again soon.
I'm trying to like signal to Deborah.
Well, thank you all for being here. Again, we're really thrilled to have your work here, Andrea, and I'm excited for all that's to come in the future, including with museums in the park and land back. But today, our friends at Center for Native Futures are graciously hosting a reception at 5 p.m., and we're really happy to have many of you here, including Deborah. And I know Deborah wanted to say a couple words about the center, but also inviting us all. Nice.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, actually, you asked me to come up.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. No, we want you here.
No, I wanted to be here. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Deborah Yepapapan. I'm Jemez Pueblo and Korean. I'm a visual artist as well as one of the co-founders of Center for Native Futures, and I'm currently the director of exhibitions and programs there. I also want to just mention our other co-founders, Chris Papan and Monica Rickert-Bolter are here as well, and alongside Andrea, and we're just so happy to support her here, and we're really proud, incredibly proud that I guess she broke into the space. Hopefully you were kicking those doors in. Center for Native Futures is a Native artist-led space, and it's a space that we created to provide for Native artists. It's a place where we can support other Native artists that live here in the Chicagoland area, but also we make sure to bring in artists from around the country as well. There are very, very few, if any, spaces in Chicago where we can show our art or have this type of representation that we can provide at Center for Native Futures. Andrea also, gave you a really good example of another thing that we do there, and it's that we like to challenge non-Native and white institutions to do better in how they represent Native people and Native artists. We prioritize our Native community, so it's not just a space for Native artists, but it's also a space for our Native community. It's a place where they know they are always welcome, where they can always feel safe. And we hope that, other institutions, you don't have to be a Native institution to provide safe spaces for Native people to be in. You just have to open your doors and make them welcoming. So that's one thing that we hope to, show, in our practice in how we've built our space. And with that, we also like to invite other people to come and visit and to see the exhibitions that we have in our space currently. So please do come to our space this evening. We are hosting a small reception to celebrate Andrea and to celebrate with her. And we want you all to come and celebrate with us too. We're located at 56 West Adams, right at Adams and Dearborn in the Marquette building. And yeah, come and join us. We'll have some cupcakes and some other light refreshments. And yeah, see the amazing shows that we have there and hang out with us. So thank you. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Andrea.
Me,